Jonathan from Chicago, I found out recently that there were 2 ideas for Dean Ambrose to debut on WWE TV before The Shield. One was for a feud with Mick Foley where he was a deranged fan turned enemy who wanted to punish and hold Foley accountable for ruining a generation of fans turned wrestlers who wanted to be just like him and emulate his extreme style of wrestling. The other idea was for him to be paired with AJ Lee, him being one of the patients that she met after being committed to a mental institution where they would eventually escape together and wreak havoc on TV as a Bonnie and Clyde-esque duo. My question is buy or sell on which idea you think is better and you would have rather have seen for Ambrose if the Shield never happened. So we'll take the Foley idea first. Yes, I am aware of that idea. I have the video. It's probably on YouTube, but I remember I actually pulled it. I saved it. I have it on my computer somewhere. The video with Foley and Ambrose in the hotel lobby, WrestleMania 27 weekend, they started to shoot the angle. Ambrose he walked right up to him. It's just Foley in the lobby of the hotel. He's being swarmed by a small group of fans, and he's talking to them and signing autographs. And here comes Ambrose, right? I think he was in his leather jacket. He just kind of moseys on up. And he was a member of the FCW roster at the time. And he just started going off on Foley, very quietly. He wasn't yelling or anything, but he got up in Foley's face. They did it in a very realistic way. And if you didn't know him from the indies, if you didn't watch FCW and how many people were watching FCW, you wouldn't even know who this guy was. You would think he was a fan. You would think he was a deranged fan. He walked right up to Foley and he started waging this campaign against him for influencing a whole generation of kids who were trying to emulate his hardcore style. And these kids are going out there and they're hurting themselves and you need to be held accountable. He kept saying that. And Foley got angry. He goes, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "What do you mean I need to be held accountable?" And it was done in a very realistic way. What happened, though, is that he brought Foley's family into it. And that legitimately upset Foley, who ended up calling the whole thing off. But Foley also met with a neurologist around that time, and the neurologist told him you should never be wrestling ever again. So even if Foley didn't get upset about what Ambrose was, he went too far, it probably wasn't going to go anywhere anyway. On the second idea, it was Kevin Eck. Kevin Eck was the writer who made the pitch. It was around the time that AJ and Daniel Bryan were about to be married. They had that wedding ceremony on TV. The idea is that Bryan would have her committed after that to a mental institution. And when she came back, she would have her new boyfriend with her that she met on the inside. And it would be Ambrose. And they would be, again, like a modern day Bonnie and Clyde or, Mickey and Mallory from the movie Natural Born Thrillers, which actually sounds like an amazing idea that could have worked. But Vince McMahon chose to make AJ the Raw GM instead. That's when AJ Lee became the new Raw general manager. I got to tell you, the Foley idea had potential, but I would totally buy on that second idea more. I think that idea is the one that intrigues me more. I think that definitely could have worked. Colin from Santa Rosa, California. Over a year ago, I listened to a clip from Jim Ross's podcast where he talked about the events that led up to Steve Austin walking out of WWE. He mentioned one of the major factors was WrestleMania 18. Apparently, the original plan was for Austin to lose to Scott Hall, which is completely insane. It wasn't until the day of the show that JR and Pat Patterson were able to change Vince's mind to the correct outcome. Have you heard that story before? Why was the match at WrestleMania not Austin against Kevin Nash? Nash was the bigger star and better wrestler, and since he's friends with Austin, I think they would have had a very good match. Also, Hall was already in such bad shape, and Nash did not have a match, and instead had to be on standby in case Hall couldn't go. So then why book him in the first place? And lastly, can you name any other big matches where absolutely the wrong person was scheduled to go over, only for Vince to change his mind at the last minute? Let's take the NWO stuff first. The original plan, and Kevin Nash has talked about this, and it makes sense. They brought the NWO into the company, Hogan, Hall, and Nash. The idea was that the NWO would leave WrestleMania with heat, which is something you didn't see very often at WrestleMania. Usually it was the happy ending, but the idea was that Hall would beat Austin, I think Rock would beat Hogan, but then they would beat down Rock. And they would leave with heat. With the idea that you can get 6 to 12 months out of an NWO run in WWE. And look what they did. The NWO was fresh and brand new in that company. And in their very first pay-per-view in the ring, Austin beats Scott Hall, and The Rock beats Hulk Hogan. And then when the match is over, they have Hall and Nash turn on Hogan, and then Rock and Hogan team up to beat up Hall and Nash. So not only did they not leave with any heat, they left with the opposite of heat. They lost the biggest name in the entire faction. They lost their leader. It was down to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. So they killed the NWO long before the NWO was disbanded in July. They were already dead. The NWO was already done. Hall beating Austin was the plan. I've heard the exact same thing. Now, why would they put Hall in the match and not Nash? I have to just imagine they thought it would be a better match. And Scott Hall was not a mess at the time. Nash tells the story that when Hall found out he was losing and he lost to Austin at WrestleMania, when they went back to the hotel that night, he saw Hall going into the hotel bar. And he says that he had been sober for a period of time up to that point, to the best of his knowledge, and his heart just sank when he saw that, because he knew what that meant. He saw him go into the bar. He's like, shit. So if he is to be believed, Hall was back on the wagon during this period. Scott Hall, when he's on his A game, was very good. And, he was a better wrestler than Kevin Nash. So if they thought that Hall had his act together, and I imagine they did or else they wouldn't have hired him, they said the best match to do is Austin and Hall. We'll have Kev there in case something goes sideways and Scott falls off and we need somebody. We always have Nash. But I think it was just a matter of they thought that would be the better match to do. As far as matches where the incorrect outcome was changed at the last minute, I think of a few matches. One of them that jumps in my head, this is not in any particular order. I think of The Shield. Right? I mentioned that this November is going to be the 10-year anniversary of The Shield. I think it was the second ever match they had together on pay-per-view, which was right before WrestleMania. They did The Shield against John Cena, Ryback, and Sheamus. They did it on the Elimination Chamber show. It was in 2013. And so that's only their second big match together as a group. And they were going to lose. The Shield was booked to lose in their second match. All three Shield guys went to Vince's office. They banded together. And they let him know why they thought that was a very stupid idea. And they were right. They would have become the new Nexus. Just like everybody else who ran into John Cena, they would have become they would have Nexused the Shield only a few months into their run. Once Cena beat the Nexus at SummerSlam, they were done. Same thing may well have happened to the Shield. They convinced Vince to change his mind. He says, you know what, you're right. And so they changed the finish. That was the right move to make. I think of the WrestleMania main event in 2015. Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns turned into a triple threat. Seth Rollins cashed in his Money in the Bank. I don't know how far in advance they had decided that they were going to do the cash-in on that show. Roman Reigns was going to go over. That's where the whole story comes from, that his father, Sika, was not very happy. He was there in attendance thinking his son was probably going to win the world title. He was not very happy when that show was over. Rollins has always said that they pulled him into a room during the show. He had already wrestled Randy Orton and lost earlier in the night. Later on in the show, he got pulled into a room, I think, with Vince, and maybe Heyman was in there and Michael Hayes, and they told him, hey, here's what we're going to do. Sounds pretty last minute to me. And that's one of the all-time most memorable WrestleMania finishes now. So those are two matches that come to mind. I'm sure there have been others, but those are two more recent examples of that happening.